The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the show, we'll explore how Governor Mike Kehoe plans to enact his agenda and maneuver through a chronically fractured GOP-controlled legislature. We'll also speak with former Missouri Secretary of State Robin Carnahan about her time leading the General Services Administration. But first, Melissa Price Smith took over as St. Louis County's prosecutor after Wesley Bell resigned to become Missouri's 1st District Congressman. And to put it mildly, her trajectory to this vital post was anything but smooth. After Bell resigned, St. Louis County Executive Sam Page announced a process to appoint a Democratic replacement, pointing to language in the county's charter. But GOP Governor Mike Parson asserted he had the right to choose Bell's replacement. And Parson wanted to pick Price Smith, who'd spent years working in different parts of the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office. And after a circuit court judge and the state's Eastern District Court of Appeals ruled that Parson did have the power to fill the vacancy, Price Smith took her oath of office earlier this month. She spoke last week with STLPR's Rachel Lippmann and me about the political controversy surrounding her appointment and how she plans to make changes in the vital office.
So, Melissa, you've been with the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office for more than 20 years. Why was now, in 2024 and 2025, the time to go for the top job?
Well, actually, I have never aspired for any type of public office. I've been in this office since 2008. I love this office. I've grown up here. I've done almost every area of the office, including low-level misdemeanors, robberies, burglaries, homicide, guns and drugs, and for the last several years, sexual assault, child abuse. But when Wesley Bell won the primary and we realized he was leaving, I realized that there was a need. There was a place for me I realized the office needed a prosecutor to run it. And I can't tell you enough how much it meant the support of my colleagues, the other prosecutors, victim advocates, investigators, support staff, who were so supportive of me stepping up as a prosecutor to run this office. So it was really just seeing the need and stepping up.
There was a lot of uncertainty about who was actually going to appoint the prosecutor. Obviously, with the court decision, it ended up being the governor. How did you prepare to take on this extremely important job, given all the uncertainty about whether you'd get it or not?
Well, that is quite true. It actually did seem to change every single day. So all I was able to do was stay focused on what I wanted to do. And basically, I don't even like to say what we wanted to do, my colleagues and I, to make this office stronger. I believed all along that the governor did have the power to appoint. However, it went to the state court, it went to the Court of Appeals, and like I said, every day seemed to be a different answer. However, I trusted in the legal process. I've made a career of trusting in the legal process, and they agreed that it was the governor's appointment to make. I do believe Dr. Page I don't think he was rejecting me personally. I think he was really trying to just preserve his power of appointment. And now that the appointment has been made, I really just want to focus on this office. And I intend to work closely with the council and with Dr. Page and cooperate, and we can put all of that circus leading up to this behind us.
What was or did you make a big change on day one?
Well, on one of the things I had spoken about prior to being sworn in was we needed to get a violent crime unit up and running. And I will tell you, we got that in place on Friday, which was the afternoon that I was sworn in. In a county the size of St. Louis County, we need a strong, dedicated violent crime unit. We already have a sexual assault, child abuse unit, and a DV unit. So this violent crime unit will specialize in violent crimes and give these types of crimes their full attention. Within a couple weeks, we will also have a dedicated homicide unit in place too.
How would you describe your prosecutorial philosophy? And I ask that question because sort of in the political realm of elected prosecutors, people are considered like tough on crime or reform or liberal. Those really don't describe philosophical ideas about prosecution. So I'd like you to actually define yourself rather than just be put under a generic label like I just mentioned.
Yeah. I was hired by Bob McCullough. I worked under him for about 10, 11 years, worked for Wesley Bell for 6 years. I have learned from both of them, and I intend to take things I've learned from both. I intend to be tough on crime. However, I also feel very strongly about each case needs to be looked at on an individual case-by-case basis. We have incredible program run by Danielle Smith, our treatment courts. Now, treatment courts are, first of all, they're an integral part of the system, and I intend not only to keep those programs, but to expand on them. They help first-time nonviolent offenders to get the help they need, to get a second chance, to avoid a criminal record, and really to change the whole trajectory of their lives. I've said this before and I'll say it again. If there were drug courts 40 years ago, my brother might still be with us today. It is a very important part of our system. But so I see that side of it, and I want to not only expand that, but keep that going. But I also want an office that is tough on crime and that holds violent offenders accountable, and that gives victims a voice and helps victims to find justice.
So a prosecutor in an office the size of St. Louis County certainly sets the tone for how they want to see cases handled, but it is kind of managing a mid-sized law firm at its heart. So we've asked about your prosecutorial philosophy. How would you explain your management philosophy?
Well, I am happy to say that the people in this office I have worked with for years. So I know them, I know their personalities, and I also know I have stressed to everyone in the office how important their voices are, and there is so much strength in this office, and everyone will have a role. I think one of the important things, though, about somebody in a position like mine is knowing what you don't know. I'm a career prosecutor. I'm not going to come in here and say I've run a huge business or a big law firm. But the important thing is that I surround myself with the right people and the people who do have those skills. And that's what I'm in the process of doing and intend to do to make my team strong. So for the areas that I don't have a strength, I'll have people who do that.
You had mentioned elsewhere that you think crime in St. Louis County is, quote, astronomical. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Well, I think I don't have data, but I will tell you, we have about 50 attorneys, that's not an exact number, prosecutors in our office. Everyone carries a caseload of 150 plus, some 200 plus, pending cases at all times. In addition to that, we have hundreds of cases that haven't even been reviewed yet. So, as a St. Louis County resident, as a mother, as a citizen of St. Louis County, I want crime to be lower. I want there to be less crime. Like I said, I'm not here to share data, which I will be, as time goes on. But right now, we need to get a hold on crime, especially violent crime.
In 2017, St. Louis County voters approved a half-cent sales tax hike to enhance public safety. I believe the prosecutor's office received some of that money. Backers at the time contended this money would be transformative toward fighting crime. Does the fact that you describe the crime rate as astronomical, is that an acknowledgement that strategy that was put forth in 2017 hasn't worked?
That's not an acknowledgement or comment on that at all. I am just saying I think crime is too high in St. Louis County. That's it. It's not an acknowledgement or a criticism of anything not working. I just think we need a more efficient, stronger prosecutor's office. We need to work in partnership with law enforcement to lower crime. I think any resident of St. Louis County would say it's definitely higher than we're all comfortable with.
You have indicated that you support an investigation from the state auditor's office into the prosecutor's office. Does that indicate you think there might be some kind of wrongdoing or perhaps mismanagement by your predecessor?
I'm not saying that at all. However, I thanked Councilman Harder for bringing forth that resolution. When I was questioned by the county council a few weeks ago, I had actually also suggested that it's not a criticism or an accusation of anything or anyone. However, I think an investigation by the state auditor is very important into the budget, into the finances, into compliance with sunshine requests. As a person taking over the office, it gives me a clear picture of what's been going on. It also, in order for me to have all of this information, will allow me to be transparent with the public. And I think that's really, really important to know what's been going on, to put my arms around it, so I can make changes and make this office more efficient.
I want to take a few minutes right now to talk a little bit about Melissa Price Smith, the person. We've talked about you as a prosecutor. I did read that your parents were owners of a Playboy club and you and your sister were professional dancers with Siegfried and Roy. How did you go from that background to being in the courtroom and prosecuting some incredibly difficult cases?
Well, I think that's the normal pathway to law school that everyone takes. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, we grew up. My sister and I grew up very, very close to our parents. My parents did run the St. Louis Playboy Club, which was an icon during that time. More recently, my parents, however, my dad passed away 2 years ago, they created and ran the Men's Group Against Cancer, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for cancer organizations in St. Louis. My mom has been the executive director of that organization for years. So they have been role models to us about being independent, being strong, and making positive changes. Yes, my sister and I grew up in a ballet company in St. Louis. We went on to dance on a cruise ship, and then we danced for Siegfried and Roy in Las Vegas. I wanted to make a difference, though. I always felt strongly that I wanted to be a prosecutor, in particular working with crime victims and helping them through their storm and helping them find justice on the other side and to be able to move on with their lives and flourish. But my parents have always been big supporters of independence and strength and chasing after what you want and making a difference.
You are the first woman to ever hold countywide office in St. Louis County's history. My impulse on that is to say, I can't believe I'm making that statement. But when you put nuance in it, for a long time, there were only 2 elected countywide positions. So you didn't have as many opportunities. But I would be interested to hear what that distinction and breaking that glass ceiling means for you.
You know, it means a lot to me. I have 2 kids. I have a son and a daughter. I will tell you, though, when I was first appointed by the governor and the first time I actually heard it said, you are the first woman prosecutor of St. Louis County, first thing I thought about was my daughter. And it feels great. And I am so inspired by the strong women that are around me. And we all hold each other up, and I just hope I can help do that for others.
We've talked about the fact that you have a sister, but we haven't mentioned that she is a twin. And to the point where photographers that you're swearing in were doing double takes and going, wait, who is... Have you ever used that to mess with people or get up to other shenanigans, try and convince somebody that you are the other sister?
We are identical. We're 20 minutes apart. I'm the older sister. We don't have to mess with people because it just happens naturally. Because, well, she was in this office about 25 years. She just left a few months ago. So in court, in the office, people were always confused. There are some people who immediately can tell us apart. Other people for years cannot. But she's my twin soul. I will say she's the best trial lawyer I've ever seen. I've learned from her as a prosecutor and, more importantly, as a person. We hold each other up. We keep each other brave. We challenge each other, but we're not competitive with each other.
There's a serious side to this too, though. As you mentioned, your sister she's left the prosecutor's office, but she's a litigator. People get you confused all the time. Are there security or safety implications there for your sister? You have someone who isn't happy with the decision that you've made and gets your sister confused for you.
I will tell you that has been brought up to me a lot in the last 24 hours. I have never, thought about security, anything like that, but I suddenly, as I'm asked about that in the office, I suddenly find myself thinking about my sister, thinking, wait a minute, if I do, she and I share a face. So it's actually a pretty new topic for me.
1 year from now, how will you measure whether you've been successful in this job?
I will be able to measure how I've been successful in this job because we will have a more efficient office. We will have stronger teams in the office, stronger attorneys, because I intend to have a stronger training process. In addition, our partnership with law enforcement, I intend for it to be stronger, and I am certain it will be stronger. In addition, I want our partnership with the community to be stronger. I want to make sure that people trust our office. Our partnership with defense attorneys, with the judiciary, all of those things need to be strengthened because that's the way the justice system works, and those are my goals.
I know you've been in office barely a week now, but do you have plans for 2026 to seek a full term?
Yes, I've only been in office a couple days, but yes, I absolutely plan on running at the next election. As I've said to many people, I'm a prosecutor, I'm not a politician, but I absolutely intend to run, and I intend to win because I think St. Louis County wants a prosecutor leading this office. I don't think they need another politician.
That was St. Louis County Prosecutor Melissa Price-Smith talking with STLPR's Rachel Lippmann and me about her first few days on the job. Coming up, we'll look into how Governor Mike Kehoe plans to navigate the Missouri governorship with a GOP-controlled legislature wrecked with chronic infighting. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Now, halfway through this first month of the new year, there's already been a major changing of the guard in Missouri politics. Last week, the Missouri General Assembly came back into session, putting into place new Republican leaders of the House and Senate. And earlier this week, Mike Kehoe took the oath of office as Missouri's 58th governor in front of hundreds of well-wishers braving frigid temperatures on the lawn of the Missouri Capitol complex.
Missouri, as governor of the state of Missouri.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
I'll let you in on a little secret. Inaugurations are like catnip for political reporters. There's something about the pomp and ceremony and routine of people getting sworn in as elected officials that's quite alluring to reporters. These events often feature people accentuating the positive possibilities of politics, like being able to solve big problems, or, as Kehoe mentioned in his address, working beyond partisan or personal divides.
I will talk to anyone, work with anyone, and root for anyone who has a good idea to make our state stronger and better. And when we succeed, together, Missouri and our citizens will serve as a model of responsible, conservative, and innovative leadership.
Here's another secret. The sugar high of Inauguration Day in Missouri, or basically anywhere, can fade away pretty quickly. Missouri governors have to make difficult decisions on how to spend money or deal with unforeseen events. And legislative bodies are designed to foster disagreement, which either leads to compromise or just a lot of gridlock. Speaking of gridlock, last week's typically ceremonial election of a Missouri House Speaker intertwined tradition with a little bit of drama that may foreshadow contentious times ahead. Here's a bit of background. Republicans hold commanding majorities in the Missouri House and Senate, which means that the leaders of both of those chambers are going to be part of the GOP caucus. Senators selected Cindy O'Loughlin of Shelbina as president pro tem with little friction. But in a highly unusual move, State Representative Justin Sparks of Wildwood challenged John Patterson of Lee Summit for Missouri Speaker of the House on the floor. GOP legislators like Bryant Wolfen of St. Genevieve contended that votes against Patterson sent a message against centralized power of the Republican House majority.
Over time, power has steadily shifted away from the people and this body, concentrated instead in the hands of a few. Today, the Speaker holds a level of authority that would make even a monarch blush. This is not what self-government looks like. This is not what liberty demands. And this is not what our founders envisioned.
Sparks, who didn't talk during the vote, failed pretty spectacularly at his challenge of Patterson. Patterson received 152 out of 163 votes for Speaker, and Patterson, a surgeon who represents a portion of the Kansas City suburbs in the Missouri House, did not hold back on how much disdain he had for Sparks' challenge.
This was a person with an oceanic ego who took it upon himself to make this day about himself.
The House clash between Patterson and Sparks highlighted the longest-running storyline in Missouri legislative politics, internal schisms among Republicans. In some respects, this dynamic was inevitable after Republican caucuses in the Senate and the House grew over the 2010s. But the disunity, which is especially chronic in the Missouri Senate, derailed key GOP priorities, such as making it harder to amend Missouri's Constitution. Patterson had some unusual allies in his Speaker fight. House Democrats, who in precedented times would have voted for House Minority Leader Ashley Aune. Aune explained why her caucus voted for Patterson shortly after the Speaker's vote.
You elected us, you sent us down here, you entrusted us to do this work. We are going to do the best we can for our constituents and for every single Missouri family. That means putting our differences aside and showing some unity and some mutual respect.
Aune, who also represents Kansas City suburbs, says that while her caucus decided to support Patterson in this particular fight, she's not expecting that he'll chart a moderate course as Speaker.
He built a very conservative coalition to get where he is today. He had to. He had to appease the folks on the far right of his caucus to earn their trust. So he will be expected, I think, to move further to the right than we've seen him before, and I'll be interested to see how that takes shape this session.
At this point, there are some things Kehoe and Republicans plan to hone in on over the next few months. Kehoe made enhancing public safety a major aspect of his successful gubernatorial campaign, and Democratic Senator Tracy McCreary of St. Louis County is bracing for a contentious fight over whether to place a gubernatorial board in charge of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department.
The Kansas City Police are under state control, and they have their own challenges with crime and public safety, so I don't think state control is the answer. I think that we're going to have to get all of the players around the table and have some tough conversations, quite honestly. You know, I do know that there is a lot of frustration, not just in St. Louis City, but also in St. Louis County with crime being on the, certain kinds of crime being on the increase.
Republicans are also expected to at least test the waters on a measure to either repeal or replace Amendment 3, which enshrined protections for abortion rights in the state's constitution. Any changes would have to go back to voters, most likely in 2026. And while the specifics behind an anti-Amendment 3 plan are a bit murky right now, Patterson doesn't believe the legislative debate over abortion access ended last November.
I said we respect the will of the voters, and if you read Amendment 3, the words regulate abortion after fetal viability are within the text of that amendment. So I think it's incumbent upon us to do that. I think one of the first things as a physician, what I look at is, well, what do they mean by fetal viability? I think that's one thing that we could look at and have a debate about.
Fetal viability, by the way, is defined in the Missouri Constitution as when a medical professional determines a fetus could survive outside of the womb without extraordinary medical intervention. It is important to note that some of the issues expected to define Missouri legislative politics in 2025 don't necessarily fall on a left-right spectrum. Both Republicans and Democrats have expressed support for measures making child care more available and affordable to Missourians. And O'Laughlin, the top Republican in the Senate, alluded to a bipartisan desire to revamp Missouri's Children's Division, including providing substantial raises to investigators who look into allegations of child abuse and neglect.
If you take a hard look at our child welfare system, you will see a system that is failing to meet families where they are, failing to understand their struggles, and failing to provide meaningful assistance in their time of need. Too often, instead of addressing the root causes of poverty and addiction, we criminalize them. The result, children are seized from their families, almost guaranteeing additional trauma and harm. This cannot continue.
And in some respects, Kehoe and the legislature's ability to do things that are bipartisan and typical, like crafting a budget or making core governmental services function more effectively, could be the biggest sign about whether 2025 lives up to the pomp and circumstance of Inauguration Day. Coming up on the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air, we'll talk with Robin Carnahan about her tenure as administrator for the General Services Administration. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. As President Joe Biden's term in office comes to a close, some of his administration's key appointees are reflecting on his eventful 4 years in office. And one of those people is Robin Carnahan. The Rolla, Missouri native has been the administrator of the General Services Administration since 2021. And that critical agency is in charge of managing federal buildings and procurement policies for the federal government. Carnahan is no stranger to public service. She served as Missouri Secretary of State from 2005 through 2013, and her family has been involved in Missouri and federal politics for decades. She's the daughter of former Missouri Governor Mel Carnahan and former U.S. Senator Gene Carnahan. Her brother Russ Carnahan served in Congress and the Missouri House, and her grandfather, A.S.J. Carnahan, was a Missouri congressman and ambassador to Sierra Leone. Carnahan joins us from Washington, D.C. to discuss her time as administrator and the future of the General Services Administration. Robin, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Hey, Jason, it's great to be with you.
As I mentioned, you are definitely not a stranger to leading executive agencies, particularly in Missouri. Your family has also been in charge of major enterprises, especially on a state level. But what was it like to take the helm of such a massive governmental entity like the GSA, which often doesn't get a huge amount of attention, but plays such a major role in federal government functioning?
Yeah, it's a great question because it is quite different leading a federal agency than it is at the state level. But it's worth remembering that Harry Truman is the one who established GSA 75 years ago. We just last year had our anniversary. And he did that because the federal government, the executive branch, had never really been organized or thought through intentionally. It just sort of grew over time. And so he had something called the Hoover Commission that former President Herbert Hoover led to think about how do you actually structure the executive branch of the federal government that had grown a lot after World War II and during World War II to be more effective. And so Truman's vision was that we ought to have an agency that was sort of like the back office, operations arm of the government to make government work better and save money. And so that's why GSA was established. And that still is the mission that we follow today. So for me, it's just been terrific to be able to do that because I that's what I'm all about, is like, how do we make our government work better for us, make it better, faster, cheaper, and that way we're delivering for the people we serve.
You had been a part of GSA before President Biden nominated you to lead the agency. Can you talk about what you did there and how it helped you transition into your role as administrator more seamlessly?
Yeah, it's a great question. I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be GSA administrator. Like most people, I didn't really know much about the agency at all. But if you probably remember the days of healthcare.gov, where the president's signature policy initiative kind of fell by the wayside and got in a lot of trouble because the website that people needed to go to access it didn't work and crashed. And so it got me thinking a lot about when I was Secretary of State. So much of delivery of services nowadays is really about technology, and can those technology tools serve people and do it in ways that are easy to access and secure. And it's a funny story, I was on a plane with someone who was the president's chief technology officer, and I said to her, look, I know you guys are thinking about this at the federal level, but the same issues affect states. And she said, you need to come help us with that. And so I said, well, I don't want to move to Washington. And she found a place, and that was GSA had a team that they had put together post-healthcare.gov to bring technologists and people who were thinking about helping make technology work better into the federal government.
It's often easy to caricature federal politics as this never-ending partisan fight where there's chronic gridlock and hostility rules the day. Did you find that your agency, which is literally in charge of making sure the federal government is functioning, was able to rise above that dynamic?
Yeah, look, there are things that never go out of style, and making government work better and saving money is one that crosses all kinds of lines. So in that way, here at GSA, I think, we really are an operations agency that are trying to make things work better, and that's bipartisan. So that's great. Now, that doesn't mean we don't get into, issues, because there sometimes are, but in general, we are an operations agency, and everybody wants operations to work better. So that's been a blessing to me. I will say that, the general partisan fights that happen in Washington over budgets and things like that are very disruptive to our agency. They end up costing taxpayers a lot more money because of all the things we have to plan for, and also the deferral of very basic things like how do you maintain a building and how do you dispose of buildings you don't need anymore. If you think about it in your own life, I always tell people, if you have a business that has 2 locations and you need to consolidate down into one, you need a little bit of money to get the one ready to get the other folks into, and then you sell the building you don't need anymore. Think about that on a massive scale. We've got 8,000 real estate assets around the country, and we can really optimize those and shrink that footprint, but we need to have some money to be able to do it. And so it is tiresome when people recognize that these infrastructure investments need predictable funding and they don't provide it. So for me, that's kind of the biggest frustration here, is I think we could do a lot of things better if we just had some predictability in how it was funded.
You kind of bring up another maybe nonpartisan frustration where your agency may want to shut down a governmental building that is just not serving its community very well, but there may be political pressure to keep it open just because it may be a big source of the economy of a certain place. Did you kind of run into some of those parochial disputes as GSA director, or was everybody just super happy with the way you managed the federal real estate inventory and we're perfectly fine if you wanted to do what you just mentioned and sell excess governmental buildings?
Well, if only, Jason, if only. But look, you have been around politics and politicians long enough to know that their job is to protect their districts and things that happen in their districts, and having a big government building and an asset there is obviously something that people like. But here's the reality: if they're not serving the community well and aren't being actively used, then they're actually better to do something else with them. And so, yeah, that all takes a lot of conversation and negotiation and working with local communities to make sure these government facilities in the middle, often in centers of cities, are actually productive in those cities. So, in some cases, if we need to downsize, those become municipal or state assets that they use. Other times we sell them, and they can become housing or they can become other things. So it's been really interesting to see how the role that we play with this biggest real estate portfolio in the country can really be used to help communities if you're smart about it.
The last time we talked in 2022, we were discussing how GSA was involved in following through on a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's now 2025. Where do you think the federal government is on following through on that measure?
Yeah, so the infrastructure, there were two really big pieces of legislation that affected us a lot at GSA. One was the infrastructure bill that you mentioned, and the other was the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. And between those two, we ended up with about $7 billion in additional funding. And the infrastructure money is focused on how do we upgrade and modernize land ports of entry. So think about border crossings on the northern and southern borders. And the idea with that is, it's important that those do better to support trade and commerce, that they, are enhancing the safety of the country, that there's security, that there's drug interdiction facilities, all those things, as well as local good-paying jobs. So we're in the middle of a lot of those projects right now. They're in progress. And then we've also used the Inflation Reduction Act funds to not only supplement those projects and make sure that they're sustainable and green and producing good jobs, we're also investing that money all across the country in projects that make our facilities not just more sustainable, but saving money. I always talk about these investments as a triple win. They're good for American jobs and innovation. They're great for saving money for taxpayers, because particularly when you lower energy costs and use, you're saving money. And they're great for the environment in our communities. So I'm super proud of the work that we've done there all across the country.
If I'm not mistaken, though, there are elements of the infrastructure bill that still need to be rolled out when Biden leaves office. What are going to be some of the things that your successor as GSA administrator is going to need to do to make sure this legislation, which I should just note was one of the few bipartisan things that passed during Biden's term, continues to be rolled out in the most effective manner?
We know how that money is going to be spent. We have 26 projects across the country. They're identified. We're in the midst of getting RFPs and things done for those and getting bids to start construction. Some construction's already started. So I think for us at GSA, it's pretty clear where that infrastructure money is going. I think for other agencies, if you think about the Department of Transportation or others that got a lot of money that then is passed out through grants to states or to counties or to cities, that's another story. But for us, we know exactly where all that money needs to go.
We're talking with Robin Carnahan, who is the administrator of the General Services Administration. So I want to talk about the hottest topic in technology, which is AI. Seems to be on the top of everybody's mind right now. And you've talked a lot about how artificial intelligence could be implemented into the federal government. Can you talk about how it could make agencies function more efficiently and effectively?
When I think about AI, which is, it means lots of different things, but a lot of it is about data, right? How do you use these large language models and all of this data to actually provide you better insights in how you're doing your work? And as you think about data, an awful lot of foundational sources of data are government sources. Think about identity, comes from states or from passports or Social Security. You think about businesses, they're licensed by government. You think about property records. You think about weather records, health records. Lots of things are foundational source of data is government data. So question, how do we get that data that has frankly already been paid for by taxpayers, right, able to be ingested and used effectively in these large language models. And how do we make sure it is accurate? How do we make sure it's secure? How do we make sure it's used in ways that are responsible and accessible to everyone? So that's sort of the umbrella notion here, is that there's lots of ways we could use this data to deliver better for people. And so we've put out at GSA an AI procurement guide. It seems kind of wonky to think about, but all of these tools have to be bought by somebody who is a procurement officer whose job it is to buy technology tools for the government. And so what we're trying to do is lay out a lot of the trade-offs and things that people should think about as they use these tools. But it's really super exciting. And we have lots of deployment going on within GSA and across government to make things work better and to not get behind the curve on what we know is going to be just a transformational societal change.
Well, you mentioned accuracy, and I think that has been one of the big problems of things like ChatGPT. And I'm going to give you an example that is admittingly a bit on the nose, but I think kind of showcases the pitfalls here. So oftentimes when I find an AI service that is either run by Google, Facebook, Twitter, or ChatGPT, I do a test. Has there ever been a governor from Jefferson County, Missouri? And oftentimes the prompt says no.
I even know the answer to that.
Yeah, the answer, of course, is Jay Nixon. He's from
Yes.
DeSoto. Oftentimes it says, no, there's never been a governor from Jefferson County. And I'm like, are you sure about that? And then, I kid you not, oftentimes the ChatGPT would say, oh, I'm sorry, Mel Carnahan was a governor from Jefferson County, Missouri. And I was like, no, that's not true. He's from Rolla, Missouri. Everybody knows that.
Actually, he was born in Birch Tree, so that is down in Shannon County.
Fair point. But that can be funny for an anecdote like this. But if you're talking about a situation where you're using AI for somebody to access critical government services and it gets basic facts like that wrong, it could be really bad. So how do you kind of like avoid some of those pitfalls to where AI doesn't make really obvious mistakes like that and it kind of makes it less useful than exciting?
Right. So again, it goes back to what you're optimizing for and what you're using it for. So in some of our instances, we use internal data, and so we know the data sources. So figuring out how you've trained your large language models is really important, and the data sources that are used for that are the foundation. So that's the key here, is knowing what you're relying on and knowing if the data is good. It's the same issue that's plagued computers since the beginning, which is, if you put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. So understanding data sources and having lots of transparency about that is super important.
When you're talking about the federal government, which has an incredible amount of data, and then you're also talking about AI, which I think one of the criticisms of it is that it can be very environmentally taxing just because of the amount of energy it needs to work. That seems to also be kind of a long-term challenge if you're thinking about deploying AI in kind of a environmentally responsible way. What has kind of been the discussions around that sort of aspect of infusing artificial intelligence within the federal government?
Well, look, you bring up a really important issue, which is energy and energy security, and how do we make sure in an era where there is increasing demand for power and energy from the hyperscalers and the folks who are putting out these AI tools. There are a few things that we're doing. At GSA, we're one of the biggest buyers of power in the country. And so we have used that buying power to try to work on getting net new carbon-free electricity on the grid. And so just last week, we announced a really big purchase of carbon-free electricity in a big region in Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and along the eastern seaboard. that is a 10-year contract for the government to buy carbon-free electricity. And it's smart because it locks in prices for energy for 10 years for the government in an era where we don't know what demand is going to do to prices. So I think those two issues, the sort of issue of how do we deal with and stay globally competitive when it comes to artificial intelligence and these new tools, to do that, we have got to have energy security at the same time and link those two together. And so we understand that the future is going to be won by the country who figures that out, how to provide that carbon-free electricity in ways that are affordable for people, but also meet the demands of the new technology going forward.
You mentioned that you have tried to create a procurement guide for the federal government to obtain AI services. As far as I know, most of the AI that we see, at least from a consumer level, have been deployed by for-profit companies. How do you make sure that the federal government is not being, I don't want to use the word ripped off because that's pejorative, but they're getting the best value and they're not overspending for these products, basically?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. It's how do you have government become better buyers of these new technology tools? That's how I think of it. How do we make sure we're asking for the right thing and getting the best price? And it's not just about AI tools where we're thinking about this. There's a great example just recently of a project where Microsoft, which provides lots and lots of software to the government, was basically selling the same products to different agencies for different prices, right? And so the government sort of figured out that we need to be better buyers, and part of that is understanding what the price is that everybody's paying and make sure we're all getting the best price. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but the way government buying happens is very disjointed and diversified. And so bringing that all together is about being a smarter buyer. So that's what these guides are about, are helping the folks that are at agencies that are in charge of a bunch of this, know the right questions to ask and be able to have transparency about pricing and value.
So your term or tenure as GSA administrator will end when President-elect Trump returns to the White House. Do you have any sort of early plans on what you plan to do next besides, I don't know, taking a wonderful vacation taking a wonderful vacation and seeing all the beautiful state parks in the state of Missouri?
Well, that is a great goal and aspiration, to get out to more Missouri state parks. Look, I've had a terrific run here at GSA. It's been a great honor to serve, to be in a place where you can use the buying power of the federal government to help drive markets and grow the economy and focus on things like helping small businesses and pushing forward on the green energy economy, and thinking both about physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure and how we do those things better, faster, and cheaper. Those are issues I'm going to stay involved in going forward, but I'll do it from outside of government, and just really excited to have had this chance to make a difference. I often say that you don't often in life have a chance to have money and momentum at the same time, to work on really, really important things that have a big impact on your community and your country. And we've been able to do that here at GSA in the last 4 years. And so I feel great about that.
What advice would you have for whoever becomes the next General Services administrator?
Yeah, that's pretty easy. That is to just rely on the good people that we have here on this team. There are about 12,000 GSA employees. They are 75% of those are outside of Washington, all around the country. About 75% of our assets are outside of Washington. And these are professionals that really know what they're doing. And so there may be 30 political appointees on our team. And so just understanding that the real operations and value of the work here is done by the professionals that have made a career of serving the public at GSA, and to listen to them, and help them get things unblocked and empower them to do the work they know is important for the American people.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Witzenkowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.